There's one tool in Camera Raw and Lightroom that most photographers instantly dismiss. But what if I told you that it's one of the most powerful ways to transform your wildlife photos in mere seconds, and that by the end of this video, it will likely be one of your go-to editing tools? I'm talking about linear and radial gradients. They may seem simple or even a bit confusing at first, but used in the right way, they can totally change the appearance of your images. And the best part, they basically take no time to apply at all. I'm Wegener, and for over 20 years, I've been a professional photographer capturing unique bird photos and videos and teaching all of you to create your own masterpieces. Gradients are such a great way to edit, especially in Lightroom, because they have very soft transitions, allowing us to make sometimes drastic changes that still blend in very well and are basically invisible in your final edit. Personally, I love gradients because they are so fun and easy to use and also allow us to reshape the light or change the look of our images in a few seconds. So let me show you now where to find them and how to make them work for you. If you're in Lightroom, you simply have to head over on the right-hand side in the Develop section where it says Masking. Click on that, and that gives you a few different masks you can select from. And down here towards the bottom, we have the linear gradient and the radial gradient. If you find yourself in Photoshop, there's actually two ways to use the gradients in an effective way. First of all, when you open a raw file in Camera Raw in Photoshop, you can head over on the right-hand side again where it says Masking, and you find a similar panel to the one in Lightroom where you can have your masking options, and down here we as well have a linear and a radial gradient. That's one way to use it at the start of the editing process. But the most powerful way to actually use gradients to me is after the initial raw processing during the editing process once your file's already open. So what I would recommend doing when you're in Photoshop is open your raw file in Camera Raw, make all your standard adjustments to your raw file, and then open it up in Photoshop without applying any masks initially. And once a file is open in Photoshop, I would recommend to duplicate the background layer by, for instance, just dragging onto the plus sign here. And then you can go over here on the top where it says Filter, and then navigate down to where it says Camera Raw Filter. That now reopens Camera Raw for us as a filter, and if we navigate now to the masking section on the right hand side, we have all our gradients available again, and if we apply them now and click OK, they will be applied to the copy of our background layer. So how do the gradients actually work, and how can we make them work for us? And if you want to learn more about image editing and all these little tricks and techniques that make your images stand out, also make sure to check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop Masterclasses down there in the description where I teach you all of this in great detail. So when it comes to the gradients, they actually work the same in Camera Raw and Lightroom, and I've opened up an image here in Lightroom for us now so I can show you how they work. And I want to show you the linear gradient first. So I navigated to the masking section on the right hand side in the Develop panel, and then I go down here to linear gradient. And when I click on that, you see that on the upper right hand side here it creates a new mask, but nothing else has happened so far because we need to now actually click into the image and then drag the gradient into the direction that we want. So let's say I want to darken this area in front of the duck. So I would click at the bottom of the image and then pull up the gradient. And now you can see I can pull this up all the way or make it very narrow. And the important thing here is to know the bigger you make your gradient, the smoother the feather or the transition will be. So generally I would recommend that you use quite a big gradient. So I would click at the bottom of the image, but then drag it up all the way, let go. And now we can also move the gradient around. So if I click on that little circle here in the middle, I can now move the gradient up or down. And what I would do in this case, obviously I want to move it down so that the red area that shows where the gradient's effect will actually be applied just only barely intersect with the bird, indicating a very smooth transition from the foreground onto the bird. And if we wanted to, what we don't need to do in this case, but what we can do is also click up here outside the gradient where we see those two little circles, and then we can also angle it around or move it to the top of the image, for instance, if we felt like we wanted to darken the top of the image, but we don't want to do that here. So I turn it back around, drag it down. And now on the right hand side, we can also see that with the gradient, a separate panel has opened, and all the sliders that are on the right hand side visible now will only affect the area within the gradient and not the whole image, but more on that later. And next I want to show you the radial gradient, which works similar, but actually has a few more applications and intricacies. So again, we head over to the masking panel and now we click onto the radial gradient. And again, Lightroom creates a mask, but we actually have to click and drag for something to happen. So the radial gradient usually starts out as a circle, but then we can make it as big as we want. And by pulling up the mouse up or down or left or right, by holding the button still down, we can also totally arrange or change the shape of the gradient to whichever way we want to. And now again, if I let go, we see our gradient as a circle at the moment. And if we click in the middle, we can move it around. And then you also see an inner circle and an outer circle. And basically the size of the inner circle determines how much of a feather or transition is in our gradient. We can either adjust the feather on the right-hand side where it says radial gradient, so we can go to 0, then we have a very hard edge, which we don't want. Or we can go to 100% where we have a very soft edge. Or we can do the same also by clicking on the inner circle and either dragging that out to give us a hard edge or making it very small to give us a very smooth transition. Now, for instance, if I just change the exposure, you can see that I can now nicely brighten or darken certain areas with that gradient, for instance. But how we use them and when to use them, I'll show you in a little bit. Sometimes it might also happen that we want to make a super large gradient to have a very soft transitioning from one corner onto our image. In that case, I would make the gradient super big, and then we can basically push it out of our image to just get the very edge of the transition. But then if we do a few more masks, we're not able to actually see or click onto that gradient again, unless we zoom out. For instance, we click Command or Control and minus, and then we can zoom out and see our gradient again and click into the middle and move it around. If we press Z, then it will bring our image back to the full size as well. And lastly, what might also happen is that your gradient is overlapping with your subject. And this is something that we don't really want, because usually we only want to affect the background or the subject, but not both at the same time. Sometimes there can be an effect that also works, but oftentimes we don't want to affect the subject and only the background. So to remove our subject from the selection, we click on mask 1 up here, and then we go to subtract and go select subject. And now we can see that Lightroom or Camera Raw nicely deselected our subject from the gradient selection. If we now darken or brighten the background, it will not affect our subject anymore and still gives us a nice and smooth transition behind the bird. Obviously, the gradient alone doesn't do us much good because there's no initial effect. So as you see me do already, you need to also use some of the sliders on the right-hand side to actually apply an effect within the gradient. And I have a few go-to methods here that I love using in combination with the gradients. The first slider I love to pull is the dehaze, either negative to pull out some texture and make the background a bit brighter and a bit more sort of foggy mystical, or I add positive dehaze if I want to bring out more detail in my background. Hand in hand with the dehaze slider, I also like to use the temperature slider, either to make the background cooler or add nice warm glow to it. And lastly, I also like to use the exposure or the curve slider or curves panel with the gradient to either brighten or darken areas. Personally, I love using the gradients to either reshape the light in my images, bring more attention to my subject, darken or brighten distracting areas, and overall kind of work on my backgrounds. And as you've seen in this bufflehead example that I just showed you, simply making one corner of the background much brighter can give a lot more interest to an otherwise kind of flat and boring background. Here I have another example for you that I also added in my masterclass in great detail. So if you want to see this image edited from start to finish and also get the raw file to edit right alongside me, check out my masterclasses down below. But I picked this image because I think it's a fantastic image for reshaping the light. When I look at this file, I feel like that the foreground is very bright, kind of drawing your eye to this brighter area at the bottom away from the bird. And secondly, when I look at this image, I also feel like the background could be made a little bit brighter and a little bit more interesting. And here the gradient is a super effective way to get this desired result. So the first thing I would do is head over to the masking panel again. You see I already done a few other masks, but we ignore these for now. If you have done my masterclass already, you'll know what I've done in those masks. And what I want to do now is create a new mask. So I click Create New Mask and select Linear Gradient. What I want to do now is darken the foreground. So I just click at the bottom of the image and then draw up the gradient to give me a nice and large transition. And then I just pull it down a little bit so that it just affects the areas towards the bottom of the bird. And then all I need to do is go to the exposure slider, pull that down a little bit, and that allows me to darken the foreground, pulling some of the attention away from it. Now I feel like it may have gone a little bit too blue in the foreground, so we can go to the temperature slider and just adjust the color of the image to match the rest of the image. But if we click this on and off now, we can see that we went from a too bright foreground that's a little bit distracting with one linear gradient to a nice darker foreground that now makes the bird stand out much more. And next what I want to do is just add a little bit more interest to the background. And for that I want to use a very large radial gradient. So I create a new mask, click onto radial gradient, and now I just click in the image and drag it out really big. Now what I want to do as well is I want to angle it a little bit more so it's not affecting the corner on the right hand side as much. So I click down to the bottom where I see the two arrows, pull it up a bit, and then I pull it over slightly. And now you can see that if I brighten the whole image now, for instance, my bird would also go much brighter, which doesn't look good. So in this case, I need to again subtract the subject from the selection. So I go to subtract, select subject, and now only the background will be affected. And here I want to show you now one of my favorite tricks. I scroll down a little bit where it says effects, and then I go to dehaze and I pull out the dehaze. And you can see how that really nicely makes the background brighter and pulls out some of that detail. Now I feel like the mask isn't exactly in the right position, so I can click in that again and pull it around a bit from behind the bird where it's now too bright to a bit more to the left, so I have a smoother transition. And now I already like this effect, but I feel like it has pulled too much warmth and color out of my background. So I go back to the temperature slider now and just add a little bit of warmth to the image, giving me this really nice glowing effect behind the bird. And I think with these two gradients now, we already managed to transform or reshape the light in the image from an image with a dark background and a too bright foreground to a nice balanced image with a darker foreground and a nice balanced, slightly brighter background. How far you want to take things with the gradients, it's totally up to you, but I think it's a very fascinating tool to use. Like on this golden bowerbird image, that is basically just a boring bird and a flat shot between a lot of sticks. But with a few different gradients, I was actually able to bring some interest to an otherwise quite boring image, and I think overall really improved the image. So far I've shown you the more obvious ways to use the gradients, but there's one more very effective way to use especially the radial gradient, and that is to use it to remove either too bright or too dark areas from your background, and it's very effective in that way, and you don't have to do any cloning or any other work. So I've done a few tweaks already, but what I want to do now is remove that unfortunately dark area sort of right in front of the bird. You can see I have a lot of mask on the right hand side already, but now we want to add one more mask in front of the bird, and in particular we want to add a radial gradient to remove this dark area. So we click on to create new mask, go to radial gradient, and then I just drag it out to the shape of the area that I want to affect. And then I go down to my favorite weapon, the negative dehaze. I pull that back a little bit. That now already brightens the area, but it looks a little bit colorless. So what do we need to do? Add a bit of warmth to it. So I go to the temperature slider and just add that up a little bit. And now we can refine that a little bit more, but you already get the idea of what we can do. We can go in with the negative dehaze, a radial gradient, and a temperature slider, and go from an unpleasant dark area in the background to much nicer, brighter, more colorful area that blends in beautifully in our whole image. And I've done the same in another Lightroom video that I recently shared with you, so you can check that out where I edit a dark, noisy raw file and also use the radial gradient to affect the background and remove some dark areas in the background that were very unpleasant in that image. So if you're not sure where to start when it comes to image editing, or what sliders to pull, or how to get the best results and find it a frustrating experience, I recommend that you check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop Masterclasses down there in the description, because I know that will help you a lot by supplying you with an easy to follow workflow that works on all your images and gives you great results with ease. So far, we've only edited in Lightroom, but as I said at the beginning, essentially the gradients work identical in Photoshop and Lightroom, just how we get there is a little bit different. And so for the last example, I opened up a file in Photoshop. And as you can see in this image, there's sort of a few problematic areas because the sun was kind of high in the sky, hidden behind some clouds, but also came from behind the bird. So there's some very bright areas on the back of the bird and then some very dark areas on the front of the bird. So what I want to do now is to use the gradient and intersect it with a select subject mask, allowing me basically to draw on an effect in a nice and soft feather way on just parts of my subject. And now, since we're in Photoshop, what I would like to do is to go to my background layer and create a copy by dragging it down here onto the plus sign. That creates a copy of my background. And then I go to Filter and Camera Raw Filter. And that now opens up the Camera Raw filter for us. So I now navigate on the right hand side here to where it says Masking. And then I go to, this time, Select Subject first. So that selects my subject. But now I want to only darken down the back of the subject. And I can do that by intersecting the Select Subject mask with the radial or linear gradient. And to do that in Lightroom, you could simply hold down the Option or Alt key and the Add and Subtract would transform into Intersect, but this doesn't work in Camera Raw. So what we have to do in Camera Raw is actually go to the 3 dots and then navigate down to Intersect with Mask. And then we go to Radial Gradient. And now nothing has changed so far, but once I start drawing and dragging my gradient onto the subject, you will see the areas that will be affected by the changes we're making. So now I'm just dragging my gradient and you see now only the parts where the gradient intersects with my Select Subject mask, the effects will take change. So what I need to do here is make a quite long, narrow gradient. And then I also need to angle that around so it affects the areas that I want to affect. And now you can see basically the areas that are red are just the areas of the back of the bird that I want to affect. What I do now is I go over here on the right hand side, I pull down the exposure a little bit. And I pull down the highlights a little bit. And we can also add a tiny bit of warmth to this area. And if we click this on and off now, you can see with this trick, we were able to darken the back of the bird without really creating any strange transitions and in a much better way than we can do with most other tools. The only way I found to do this effectively as well, if you do a similar trick, go Select Subject and then intersect with the brush. But in many cases, this can actually give you an even smoother transition. And now what I want to do as well, right, need the belly, the head, and sort of the chest of the bird. So we create a new mask, we go Select Subject, and then we have to go right click, Intersect Mask with Radial Gradient. And now I kind of drag that around again, make it long first. And then I go down, angle it around. And now what I just do, I just brighten these areas a bit. We pull up the shadows a bit. And now that's done. So in Photoshop, I can click OK. And now that has been applied to the background copy. In Lightroom, we just keep editing in your editing panel like you normally do. And now if we click this effect on and off, you can see that we were nicely able to kind of reshape the light on the bird. We darkened the back and we brightened the belly, giving us a much smoother transition all over the bird without creating any nasty sort of edges on the edge of the bird or within the bird. And that's basically it already. I hope you guys learned something new in this video because personally I think gradients are such a powerful tool. They allow you to quickly reshape the light in your images, change the look of your images, remove distractions. And the best part is it's actually not that difficult to use and can be applied in just seconds. So to me, they're very powerful editing tools that I'll definitely be using more and more going forward. And now I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. Have you used gradients before? Are you using them already? What are your thoughts on them? Are you going to start using them now? Let me know in the comments. Also give me a thumbs up for the video. Of course, check out my channel membership and my masterclasses. And like always, also hit that subscribe button and I'll see you guys in another video very soon. Bye.